Are you an early stage founder revolutionizing the future of retail? Then you're in the right place. My name is Shah, and I'm an angel investor investing at the pre-seed stage in retail tech, e-commerce, and digitally native brands. I'm also the founder of Retail X Series, an in-real-life event series based in New York to help early-stage founders think through topics like customer acquisition, sales pipelines, branding, financial modeling, fundraising, and more. In this podcast, I interview founders and investors who've spoken at Retail X Series events in the past, and we dig deep into the tactics around key topics that early-stage founders want to hear about. Welcome to the Retail X podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Retail X Series podcast. I'm your host, Shah. Today's episode is all about fundraising from an entrepreneur's perspective. Our guest today is Melanie Elturk, CEO of Hijab. Melanie will share her advice, tips, and best practices for fundraising, including what worked for a D2C startup in a space that many investors really didn't understand. Welcome to the podcast, Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to this chat. So let's start with some background. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your background before you launched the company?
Sure, yes. So I'm actually an attorney by profession. I went to law school in Detroit, where I'm from, and I specialize in civil rights law. It was really, my first passion in life is just social justice issues and really doing all that I can to give my voice and the tools that I have to help those that are disenfranchised. So definitely the work that I was doing as an attorney certainly fueled the work that I'm doing now. Although, now it's a fashion play, it really is rooted in elevating our community and being, again, that voice for Muslim women in the mainstream who happen to wear hijab.
Yeah, so tell us about that. So you launched the company as a side hustle. So when was that and how did that early launch go? And then when did you ultimately commit to making this your full-time gig?
Yeah, so actually it was my husband's idea. I had left Detroit. I quit my job. I was working as a staff attorney at the Council on American Islamic Relations, a nonprofit social justice organization for Muslims. And I left to move to Chicago with my husband. I was working odd jobs, but I really had a lot of time on my hands, which I was not used to. So he had this great idea, and he's like, you love fashion. This is so much a part of who you are. Let's start a Muslim fashion line. And I was like, oh, okay. It was the furthest thing from what I wanted to do, especially with my legal background. I wanted to continue my career, which I did, but we still started this business on the side. So I thought, I've got time, why not? And that was 2010. So a couple years in, we moved to Dubai. My husband got this great offer out there. I found an amazing job at the international courts, but we still had this company. And so we were working on it on the side for 6 years until 2016, when actually a year prior, we had investor interest from a VC here in New York that ultimately we didn't accept their term sheet, but it got us thinking about the opportunity that we had. And what would it look like if we were focused on this full time, if we were able to be this successful with half of our time dedicated to it? So that's when in 2016, we decided, all right, cool, let's quit our jobs, move to New York City and focus on this full time.
That's an amazing story. I mean, you've been in business for 10 years. It's so impressive. I mean, and when we think about D2C companies right now, so many of them are kind of within the last 5 years have launched, or even within the last 2. I mean, you've really had a lot of experience in the space. So I think this is going to be a great conversation and really helpful, particularly for founders who, many founders who start things as a side hustle and are kind of very scrappy for a very long time, similar to kind of your story. So I'm excited to have this conversation about fundraising. So let's talk about that. So you moved to New York. This is no longer a side hustle. This is full time. You are all in, and you decide to raise your pre-seed round. So walk me through that process. How did you decide how much to raise, how to go about it? How long did it take?
We were so green. To some degree, I still am. Fundraising is such a foreign thing to me. I'm really good with people. I'm very smart with people. So the people and the connection side and the relationship side came very easy to me. However, just cracking through the whole VC world took a little bit of time for us. And what we did, gosh, it took us all in all probably a year to raise $500,000.
Wow.
And we were in New York and we had just moved here. We know no one. So we're trying to build up a community. We immediately started the Muslim Entrepreneurs of New York because we were trying to build this network. We would go to any and every talk, from any angel investor. Like I remember Joanne Wilson was giving this talk and I was like, we have to go, and I'm going to sit in the front row and take diligent notes and try to talk to her afterwards. And I just remember that hustle being so stressful. And I remember sitting in the room with all these other founders who were also dying to get their ideas funded, and me thinking like, I don't know how we're going to do this. So I want to say about 8 months of pounding the pavement, of trying to get, we'd have conversations, we'd get meetings, but I don't think that we were presenting ourselves in the best way. I think we were coming off as a little green when it came to the way we spoke about fundraising even, or just maybe the vision for our company. But finally, 8 months in, we had a meeting with Arlen Hamilton of Backstage Capital, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she was our first yes, and it was on the spot. I still remember we were in a breather because we didn't have our own office. We're working out of our apartment. So, we rented out a breather for an hour, and she said yes on the spot, $50,000. And I was like, what? Like, I thought it was a mistake. I was like, you want to think about it? Like, you want to get back to us? And she was like, no, I'm in. And we're like, okay. So, it was like, my dad, actually, I was talking to him yesterday. I mean, being a Muslim woman who wears hijab, obviously I'm a very religious and spiritual person, but my dad was telling me yesterday how, like, God tests your patience and tests your patience and tests your patience until the very end, like that last squeeze, and then gives you what it is you need. And so that really was it. I mean, I don't think we could have gone too much longer. I think we would have had to figure some things out. New York is not cheap, and we were living off of the business only. We didn't have any other income. So we had to make this work. And once Arlen was in, that was the wind in our sails that we needed to kind of hustle and use that momentum to raise the rest of the round, which we did within the next 3 months, which is why all in all, it was about a year.
Wow, that is such an amazing story. And I appreciate you sharing it specifically because I think what you hear from VCs, like the big VCs in Silicon Valley, is like a raise should take you 3 months, right? And that is not really true for most founders. I mean, maybe if you're in a particular sector and you're a white male founder in a B2B software company, maybe in the Valley, it might take you 3 months, but it's not what I'm hearing from founders. And so it's nice to hear that you guys stuck through it and you got that first yes, and you didn't give up even 7.5 months in, because imagine if you had, right? It would have been a whole different story.
Yeah. And so what we did after that is we got really smart about how are we going to get the rest of this round filled. So again, we were taught, Arlen is a BC. She wasn't an angel and certainly not part of my network. So at this point, having a VC in meant a lot. And it gave us leverage to go to friends and family or to angels and say, hey, we have a VC in our pre-seed round, which helped. And what Ahmed and I did very strategically is we split up the rest of the round into these $25,000 units. And we said, we have X amount of units available. You can take 1, you can take 2, you can take 3, however many you choose, but this is how many are available. First come, first serve. You're either in or out, and we need your answer in a week. And when we did that, we started to see the momentum really pick up. And certain people that we had been talking to, we circled back and, they put in, and then we started going out to our network. I was always, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's my Arab pride. I don't know. I was very hesitant about friends and family. I was always raised, my dad told me, don't mix business with pleasure. You keep your friends and your family separate from business. He always told me that. And so I guess that kind of stuck with me. And so I never wanted to go out to our network to raise money. And to some degree, I kind of still wish we hadn't had to do that, but we did. And we were able to, from, I want to say just from friends and family, I think we raised another 200,000 just from them. Then we got another VC in the round, Brilliant Ventures out of LA. They put in another 50,000, and then the rest just filled up from other angels that we were introduced to. And then we were done, and we were off to the races.
I love this story. I love the way you created the FOMO, because we talk about that all the time in the Retail X community, that, it is so hard, even if you have a big name first investor like you did, people know Arlen, people know Backstage Capital. It's still so hard to circle up and herd the cats, get all the angels and friends and family and all that other money in. And your approach really seemed to create some kind of FOMO that people really started kind of putting their money where their mouth is, which is an amazing kind of way to do it. And I hope that people listening to this podcast kind of take that as a strategy that they might use personally.
Yeah, I mean, we knew we were at a fork in the road, and it was this pivotal, crucial moment where either we would use Arlen's investment and her commitment to us as, like a watershed moment that either we're going to move in one direction and close, or we're going to continue to spin our wheels and spend another 8 months trying to get money in, and ultimately Arlen's going to be like, all right, guys, what's happening with the round. So we had to be very smart, and we were so strategic about the next steps, because otherwise we were jeopardizing the entire investment and our company and everything we had built for so many years. But yeah, it's such a funny thing how the VC world works, which is part of a reason it's not for me, it's not my thing. I know a lot of founders that go on to become VCs themselves. Never in a million years. It's not for me. I don't like the games. I don't, it's not my vibe, but we had to play the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And you certainly did it in that pre-seed round. So, I think the other thing that you mentioned here that I want to unpack a little bit further was that you really were hesitant about taking money from friends and family. Now that you're a few years later and clearly had some success, have you had any problems with friends and family being in your round? This is a question I get from entrepreneurs a lot of times, because they're not sure if they want uncle so-and-so or aunt so-and-so in their round. Was that your concern? Was that people would be not supportive or too intrusive? Were there any concerns that you had that have kind of come to light now that we're kind of a few years out?
Yeah, I mean, my concern was that the people I was reaching out to in my community, and for the record, no one in my actual family invested, but within my community, and they're like my family. I mean, like my friends' parents, like they're like, he's like my dad. He helped raise me. I spend all my days in his house.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like a father figure, and other folks like that. And what I knew is that they're not sophisticated investors. This isn't something that they know or understand how this works. If I give you $25,000 of my hard-earned money, these are working class, middle to upper class folks in the suburbs of Detroit. If I give you that $25,000, what's going to happen with it? When am I going to see it back? They didn't necessarily understand how it worked. And so I still have people who are like, hey, what's up with that money? And I'm just like, oh God. I'm like, I really want to get to a point where we can just clean up the cap table from some of these early investors, give them whatever their money is worth today and move it along, because rightly so. They're hardworking people, and they're getting older, and they want to make sure that their finances are in order. And so I understand that. And so, like I said, if I could, I mean, it's still something I wish we didn't have to do, but we did. We had to do it. And sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But if I could have avoided it, I would have.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think a lot of times, you do see in future raises, those early investors are really happy to get their money back and not, hold an investment for as long as a VC might end up holding it. So I hope that's possible for your early investors, and soon. I want to switch actually to talk a little bit about the education you had to do with investors about this category of hijab, right? Like, this is not a category that maybe your friends and family knew more about it, but that other investors really probably had never thought about it as a category that they would invest in, or even how big it is, what's the market size, how. I remember the first time you and I met and you told me how many hijabs an average woman had in her closet, and I was floored, right? So you really had to kind of tell that story in a way that many founders don't have to. Can you talk a little bit about taking a category that investors are not familiar with and really educating them to get them on board? How did you do that?
Yeah, so you have to have a really incredible, compelling deck that is chock full of stats that are easily digestible and very compelling. Just like you said, that's a data point that's stuck in your head, that Muslim women own on average anywhere between 75 to 150 hijabs. I mean, that's more than you own of socks or t-shirts or anything else. And it's true. We have we have an obsession. And the reason for that is very simple, because every time you change your top or whatever it is, you have to change your hijab. And you have certain fabrics you love to wear, and with each of those fabrics you need all of the colors that look good on your skin tone. And so I really had to walk every investor through, basics, because we would get when we still do. I mean, we're right in the middle of our post seed right now, and we just got and we were on the call with an investor, a really prolific female. She invests in females, and I wasn't speaking with her, but her associate, and she was like, well, why don't men wear hijab? And I was like, okay. To me, all these questions are great because I get to educate others on it, but it just is a reminder to me of how little people understand Muslims, Islam, hijab. These things are still foreign concepts to Americans, and it's just that much harder and that much more of an uphill battle for me to secure funding, because they have to first grasp what it is that we're doing, who this community is, what we believe in, who we are, and then think about the unit economics and our revenue and the potential and the market. For us, we have another step added in, and that's why for me it's a double-edged sword, because what it does is it filters out the VCs who are all in, 100% committed, and truly believe in our mission and believe that we need to exist, versus those who feel lukewarm and just
Right.
look at our revenue and our social following and our unit economics and say, this is a good opportunity. But I don't want people who are lukewarm. I want those who are going to fight tooth and nail when, push comes to shove. We're weathering this storm right now, and I can't tell you how incredible our investors have been, particularly our lead investor from our seed round, which is Q-Ball. They have been so fundamental in helping us through this crisis. And I know it's because from day one, when they saw this deal and they met with Ahmed and I, they had so much, honestly, like spiritual conviction, that this is it. This is an opportunity. This needs to happen. The world needs this. And so, yeah, while it can be difficult having to explain who we are and what we do and why we wear this thing on our head and all these incredibly, sometimes difficult questions that I have to answer, it's a great filtering device at the same time.
I love that kind of thought process, and I love this idea of, like, you don't want the lukewarm investors, but you want the ones that are fully committed and have great conviction about your business. Because you're right. I mean, we're talking today, it's early April of 2020. New York is still shelter in place. We are unclear. There's a lot of uncertainty on what's going to happen in our future, in the immediate future. And these kinds of times, it is really important to have investors who don't let you down. And you're so fortunate to have those people in your corner when honestly times are tough.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about it. Especially hearing from different founders and how their investors maybe aren't necessarily being there for them in the way that ours are. I just feel so grateful and so blessed. And, I hear this from them all the time is like, listen, we may not have put in a ton of money into you, but we're spending so much time with you because you are one of the people and founders and businesses whom we believe have the greatest opportunity. So, hearing that from our investors gives us so much relief, and it lets us feel like, wow, we really have people in our corner who care about what we're doing and won't just let us die or just write off this investment, because of the tumultuous times we're all going through right now. They're going to stick it through with us and see it to the other side.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're so fortunate to have that. I want to go back to the pre-seed round before we start talking about your seed for one more thing, because I know when we spoke at the RetailX live session back almost a year ago, you talked about how structure for your pre-seed round and ensuing rounds was really important, and that you couldn't do a convertible note. So can you talk about what that process was like for you, and how you chose a structure for your pre-seed round?
Yes. So because we were raising just $500,000, it didn't make sense to do a priced round. And it's rare that you'll find these small, pre-seed friends and family rounds priced out. But at the same time, we couldn't do a convertible note because of our faith and our prohibitions against dealing with interest, really trying to avoid any type of exploitation on either side, which is why we avoid dealing in any type of usury or interest. So that really narrowed things down to a safe note. And this document it's changed over the years, but it is known in the community as a very founder-friendly document, which can turn off some investors. So that was a hurdle we kind of had to jump through. There was an angel network here in New York. I'm forgetting which one it is, but they just simply said point blank, we don't do safes. So that was the end of the discussion. We didn't even pitch to them, because when they asked what instrument we were using and we said a safe doc, they were like, sorry, we're out. So,
Yeah.
and that's a sacrifice we have to make because of our own religious beliefs, and, understandably so. We ended up making it work, and it ended up being fine, but that was a choice that we had to make, knowing that it could hinder some efforts later on down the line.
Yeah, there are definitely investors who prefer certain structures versus others, particularly in New York, I think more so than in the West Coast. But thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's move to your seed round. So you had raised this $500,000 pre-seed. You're now going, to a seed round. Kind of what metrics, kind of proof of concept, sort of what were those elements that helped you know that you were ready now for a seed round, and you could, start raising at kind of a different level for a larger raise?
Yeah. So, it was a combination of, okay, money's running out. I think that's always the first indicator, is looking at your P&L each month and saying, all right, we probably need to go raise in the next 4 months or by August or whatever it was. But then thankfully our revenues had doubled. So, from when we closed that pre-seed in, I want to say it was about December of like 2017, by the time we went out to raise our seed, our revenues had doubled, which was great. We also had launched a really pivotal collection for us. It was a luxury hijab collection. It was the first time that luxury hijabs were ever put on the market en masse. And our price points were, fitting of the product. It was $250 to $325. And this really put us in the map, not just in the Muslim community, but really in the mainstream. So we got a ton of press. And we actually had investors reach out after having read the press. So it was this kind of pivotal moment for us where our company was changing. It was no longer this like mom and pop. It was really a well-established fashion industry staple that exists for Muslim women. And we were kind of now the go-to brand for Muslims. So anytime a Muslim model or influencer or celebrity or whoever it is, politician, had a photo shoot with any magazine, they would reach out to us. we were now known within that community. So all of these things combined really helped us, let us know that, okay, we can successfully go out and raise a seed round. So, let's go out there and do it. And one thing that we had done in between the pre-seed and going out to raise the seed was a monthly newsletter. I will say that I do think there's an expiration date in terms of this newsletter and how long you should be doing this for. But early on, I do think it is very important. And for us, it was a game changer. So Ahmed and I actually had joined an accelerator called Monarch. They no longer exist in the way they did, but we were their first cohort. And we learned, as you do in accelerators, you talk to, maybe that's where we met you, Sapna, I think.
Might have been, yeah. Might have been through
Yeah.
Monarch.
Yeah, it's very possible. So we met great advisors like you, and we would meet, founders who are much further along. And one of the insights we picked up was sending out this monthly update to interested parties. So these might be investors you reach out to that, we were still too early for them, angels who wanted to stay in touch, what have you. Even other founders, certainly your existing investors, because they want to stay up to date with your progress. And we send out a couple each month. But, to me, as I was sending them out, I was like, if I received this, I'd be like, okay, cool, next. Like it felt so dry. So I treated these emails the same way I treated, a marketing email that we would send out to our customers. I was marketing our brand and our company, not to our customers, but to investors, to make it appealing and enticing for them when we do announce that we're raising, for them to say, hey, let's talk, let's have a conversation. I've been following all this great progress, let's go. And I think the important part is to make it engaging. It's not that you are fudging numbers or you're telling, non-truths. You are just making it so compelling and showing the great things you're doing, but then also showing how you've learned from some mistakes you've made, or you're up against a difficulty and you're asking for advice or for insight. And we all know VCs love to give their advice. So, they're happy to reach out with their 2 cents. And so it's how do you create a compelling, engaging monthly newsletter that keeps them engaged with your business and kind of have your brand and what you're doing at the forefront of their brain. And so when we started doing that, we saw also certainly a difference almost overnight in the responses and the emails back, which I knew was a good thing and would help us once we finally did go out to raise the seed. So when we finally did announce the seed, I believe we announced it in August of 2018. And immediately we had, maybe like a week's worth of conversations on the books and pitches, and because they had been following along and they wanted to learn more and see, understand whether or not it was a good fit.
So I love that you are talking about this, because this is like advice I give all the time. I was on your update email. I think I still am. I read these. So do other investors, because first of all, it's so nice to hear from companies that you've either worked with in the past or met with. But you're right. Sometimes you're too early for certain companies, for certain VCs, certain investors, certain angels. And these emails are a way to stay top of mind. And so people are following your progress and you're doing the things that you said you'd do, right? And yours are, I will say, particularly engaging. I love yours. You always have pictures of the team. They do feel very like conversational. I get others from other companies that maybe are not, as they're a little drier, a little more boring. But it is interesting when I talk to other investors love these kinds of update emails, and they do invest based on the fact that they feel really comfortable and they've been following progress. And even if they haven't met you in person in a year or 2 years, they still feel like they know what's going on. And that makes that whole investment process, when you do go out to raise another round, so much easier. So I'm really glad that you brought this up, because I think this is something that really all founders should think about doing. And I know certainly yours look like they take quite a bit of work, but they do give you a return in spades when you go to raise that next round.
Absolutely. And it helps in that you don't have to have this long 20-minute catch up or intro, because they've been following along this whole time and they're already caught up. They already know. Now they want to know what's next. So it's a time saver as well. But as you said, it really helps so much because they have this great depth and background that they wouldn't otherwise have going into a pitch.
Yeah, for sure. So in that seed round, now that you've kept all these investors in the loop, you've now announced that you're opening your seed round. Who did you really end up targeting? Did you have still like a mix of angels and VCs? Were there family offices, strategic investors? Kind of how wide was your lens in looking for the right investors in this round?
Again, I'm not going to purport myself to be some very strategic fundraiser. I think we were still pretty green, to be totally honest, when we were raising our seed round. I mean, we were just trying to talk to anyone and everyone. One thing we knew was that angels was going to be difficult because of the minimum check size. So we had a syndicate formed for any angel that wanted to put in money, which was fine. And then the rest would come from, VCs or family offices. When you're in fashion, when you're in D2C, e-commerce, and inventory-based business, family funds are always going to be a preference, those who are more patient with capital, because we just don't have the hockey stick growth that tech companies do. It's just a different vertical. So it was really about narrowing in on the VCs who are comfortable with D2C and those who, would like I had said before, also really believe in the mission of what we were doing. We were smart enough to know that we didn't want anyone just to throw cash at us. We weren't just looking for cash. We were looking for, very strategic investors. Now, did we just take cash at the end of the day? Yeah, we did, because we needed to close our round. But at the same time, looking for a lead, I think, is a totally different exercise than looking for those to fill in the round. And we knew that we had to be really strategic about the lead, because this is somebody who was going to take a board seat. We formalized our board after our seed. And so they're going to stick around for a while, and we better make sure we really like them and they're great partners and they believe in what we're doing. So I'd say that was the most important part. I know founders who will say, listen, at the seed, just take anything you can get. You just need that money, take it and run and build this thing, execute your plans. But I think as an attorney, for me, I'm very disciplined when it comes to structure and process. And so I wanted to formalize the board earlier than later, because I knew it would just help. It would help us as a company. It would help us with our strategy moving forward. Both my husband and I are first time C-suite level founders. Actually, my husband's not. He's had a couple startups before me, but I certainly am. So, having experienced people in our corner was really important to us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you went through this process and in finding the lead and kind of finding that right fit, what were some of the hardest questions you got asked at the seed stage that you might not have gotten asked at pre-seed?
In pre-seed, what I remember is a lot of people asking us, or telling us rather, you should really think about this. Have you thought about this model? You should do this. And when you're early on in your career, and this is all a very new space to you, I remember looking at VCs like they were some like gods. Like I was like, oh my God, I took their word as gospel. And I was like, oh, but they said we should do this. Today, oh my God, the way, I mean, it's like a full 180. I don't think that way at all. But early on in those days, we would like pivot and be like, okay, maybe we should think about a subscription. And we would spend all this time and spin our wheels on something. And then I'd be like, wait, why did we just do that when I knew the answer all along? But I somehow felt compelled to take this person's advice and run with it, because I think that they have some, I don't know, expertise that I don't. And so I think the thing that was a little bit more comforting in the seed round was we didn't have a lot of that. It was really, the questions were posed at us, like, what's your vision? What do you want to build? What are you going to do with this? How are you going to make this $1 billion company? And when I felt like I was in the driver's seat of dictating and really formulating our vision and our future and our success, that was such an empowering feeling. So I suppose those were the questions that we received that we didn't get as much of early on, that you really have to have down and have thought through. And, you know, because you're now more established. This isn't just a seed idea anymore. This is now a fully functioning company with team members, and, you know, hopefully you've thought about those things and have a very clear vision moving forward. So I would say that was kind of the biggest difference between the two in terms of questions that we'd receive.
That's, you know, that is so interesting. And I hadn't really thought of it that way. So I appreciate that perspective that, you know, at pre-seed, things are not as formed in the company, or you don't have as many metrics to show, right? So investors do feel like they want to give you more advice on kind of where you could go. But at seed, you're certainly much further along, and it's really about building and building and building faster. And so I think this is a really great perspective as founders who are listening to this can think about, you know, not everything that every investor tells you in that early round is useful, and you need to have the conviction of what you're building on your own.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think I want to pivot to another question. So about co-founders. So, you know, we get a lot of questions in the Retail X community about when you have a co-founder and your co-founder is your husband, you know, are you both involved in fundraising, or is one person kind of running the ship while the other person fundraises? And in your rounds to date, have you divided and conquered, or have you both been involved in fundraising? Kind of what has worked for you?
Yeah, it's actually, it was different every round. So in our first pre-seed, Ahmed and I were both in it together 50-50 because we were both figuring it out. It was new for both of us. Then in the seed round, Ahmed took more of the lead in terms of finalizing our deck, getting everything, getting all the numbers together, reaching out and researching which VCs that, you know, we should talk to. And I was, you know, kind of like, I would scoop in the pitch and, you know, talk about vision, and I would really play that, you know, speak up the brand role. In this round, we're, you know, in the middle of our post seed, it's kind of switched again. So I'm the one who is really in control of, you know, I'm the one updating that long Excel sheet with everyone we've talked to and who we want to talk to, and, you know, all of that, and then reaching out to everybody for intros. And I've been the one taking the front seat while he's really manning the ship with the rest of the team. So it's kind of flip-flopped, but I do believe and think that it is important that there is some sort of divide and conquer approach, because you, at this point, especially the later on rounds, you have a whole team to manage. And if you take your eye off the team and what they're building and doing for 1 second, you know, things fall through the cracks. So we have an incredible team, don't get me wrong. They're so amazing. But at the same time, you still need, you know, one of the co-founders or C-suite level executives in the business still really overseeing day to day, while the other is doing the bulk of the work. We still pitch together. We always pitch together no matter what. But I was certainly taking on the bulk of the raise this time around.
That's really helpful. And it's interesting to hear your perspective on different approaches in different rounds, and this whole idea of like, you do have a business, or an ongoing business that you still need to run while you're fundraising. As most people say, fundraising is kind of a full-time job. So you
Mm-hmm.
sort of have two full-time jobs while you're fundraising. So thank you for sharing that perspective. I want to switch to the two last questions I guess I have for you, and maybe they're two sides of the same coin. What is kind of the biggest mistake that you've made kind of early on in your fundraising process? And then if you were to give one piece of advice to the founders listening to this podcast, what's that one piece of advice you give to them as they go out to raise their kind of pre-seed or seed round?
Well, the first thing I would say is really think long and hard. Is this the right path for you and your business? I think a lot of us get roped into this view, myself first and foremost, that to be VC backed or VC funded is the equivalent of winning. And that is the epitome of success. And I can tell you it is not. Um, it is one way forward, and it is a path forward for some people, but it's not the end all be all. It's not the top of the pyramid. It's not, the thing that everyone should be seeking after they become founders. Everyone will have a different path. And if you can fund your business in another way, I'll tell you right now, if we could have taken out loans based on interest and just funded it that way, I would have done that. I would have done that. I'd still own all of my company, but we couldn't. And I know even for those without religious demands, I mean, debt is debt and it follows you for the rest of your life. And so I understand why people choose to go the VC route, but I had and still have so much conviction in what we're building that I knew we'd be okay if we did that. But so first and foremost, really think through it. Is this the path forward? Because keep in mind, this is a marriage with a corporate structure, an entity that is going to stick with you until the end, whatever that looks like. And this is something that once you're in the game, you're in the game. And the stakes get higher with every round. So that would be the first thing. And secondly, I really, really wish if we could go back, we would have been more reasonable around valuations. So another, I guess, myth, mistake, whatever you want to call it, that founders make is, let's go out and get the highest valuation possible. That's oftentimes equated to success. Like, oh, wow, I got a 10x valuation. Good for you. Like, the higher the valuation, the better. We did raise our seed on a 10x valuation, and it is really kicking us in the butt now. What I wish we had done was taken a more measured approach and just gone out for whatever market was. And market in D2C, I mean, keep in mind, the markets are always fluctuating. At the time we were raising seed, it really was a founder's market. And so you could demand higher valuations. That said, today, in this crisis, it certainly is an investor's market. And so now you're seeing a lot of founders having to raise down rounds and raising at valuations much lower than they would have anticipated. So the market does fluctuate, but I think if you're just moderate and staying in the middle of whatever market is for your vertical, for your industry, stick to that. Just be happy with that and move on, because it will help you so much further on. Because as I said, the stakes get higher with every round. And if you've raised a 10x, and then on the execution side, you have to work that much harder, 10 times harder, to prove out that valuation. And if you don't make it, raising your next round is going to be very difficult. You may have people who believe in what you're doing, who love you as a founder, but structurally they can't get behind the deal because of valuation. And that is like the worst place to be in. So that's one thing I would say, be really mindful and strategic about valuations when you're raising, and think about not just today and what your dilution is now. Think about your future rounds. Think about your future company when you have to raise again. What will valuation look like then? And is that going to be realistic? And that's something I think we failed to do or think through properly, because we were in the mindset of, oh, the highest valuation possible, because that's what, it puts us in the best position. And it really didn't. So that, I guess, would be my biggest piece of advice.
So I really thank you for sharing that, because I think this is something we don't talk about enough, both on the investor side and on the founder side. You're 100% correct. That, when you over optimize for valuation too early, you can really shoot yourself in the foot later. And I think cap table math and understanding what those metrics are for the next round and what that will do, and having a down round, or trying to have your existing investors kind of bridge you because you didn't hit those metrics for that next round because your earlier valuation was too high. This stuff happens all the time, but founders don't very often talk about it publicly. And I think in the early stages, you're right, it feels like you should just be trying to maximize your valuation. And sometimes that's 100% the wrong thing to do. So thank you so much for sharing that kind of advice and your experience, because I think it's something that, like I said, we don't talk about enough. And I think we should be with early stage founders.
Absolutely. And, I'm a straight shooter. I'm really direct. I just want to be helpful to people. I don't care about how it reflects on me as a founder and my experience with VCs or whatever. I just, it's information I wish I had, and I wish more people would talk about, because, you know, whatever stigmas or taboos may exist around people who raise down rounds and therefore they don't want to talk about it has only served to, you know, not help the rest of us who could have really learned from that. But, you know, the last thing I would love to say is that raising a round can be grueling and very taxing emotionally and mentally. And during our seed round, because my husband Ahmed was leading it, he really took the mental blow, and it was a really tough period for him. I was really focused on execution and operations with the business, so I was less, you know, affected emotionally. This time around, with the role switch, I really got to a dark place mentally, and it was really, really, really rough for a few weeks. And so what I want to say is, number one, be prepared, like mentally prepare yourself for mental strength. And I think a good way of doing that is not equating your value as a founder in your business with how much you can raise and whether or not VCs want to fund you. It's a very easy thing to say, but it can be very hard to implement, because when you're talking to these VCs day in, day out, and you know, you'll talk to 100 and you'll get 90 no's and 10 maybes, and if you're lucky, a couple yeses, right? But those 90 no's and passes that you're getting in your inbox day after day after day can be really taxing, and it can be incredibly detrimental to your emotional and mental health if you are internalizing that in a way that you're equating it to your value or your worth. So, you know, as much as you can, keep that top of mind so that, you know, you're treating this as an out of body experience and knowing and understanding how this all works behind the scenes, that it's a volume game for these investors, that they're looking for the no, they are looking for the reason to say no. They're asking you questions to get to the no. And when you know that and you understand that, it's much easier for you to take the devastation or the pass, you know, easier, because you know that this is all a game. And, you know, I had to swallow some really tough pills, I would say, figuratively, some really tough medicine in the last few months around this, because our seed round, we raised so quickly. You know, you were saying sometimes it takes 3 months. The money, in 3 months, it was there. We had raised, you know, 2.3 million, 2.5 million in 3 months. But closing was really difficult. We had a lot of structural things we had to reincorporate from. It was just like a lot. But we got the money really quickly. So here I am going into this round thinking, oh, it's going to be a piece of cake. You know, we're this like highly attractive business. We're this darling in the press. People love us, whatever, whatever. And then when it wasn't the case, I was like, wait, what's happening? So I had set up this high bar and expectation that this was going to be easy again. And it was anything but easy. And I really beat myself up for it. And I was in a really bad place for a few weeks. And if I could have avoided that, I would have. And some of the things I would have done was just put myself in a healthier mindset and remind myself constantly of these things that I just mentioned, in order for this to just be an easier journey.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing that. Again, I think this is another thing that founders don't talk enough about, that this is hard and that it feels lonely, and the no's are so difficult to process. I really appreciate your sharing your personal experience, because I think, again, we need to share more of these stories so that we don't feel so, you know, all of us feel so alone in the process. So I want to end this there, because honestly, we can't end on a better note. You've given some great advice. I loved the way you've shared your stories here. I hope that all the founders listening will have found multiple nuggets of really great things that they can go and take as they go out in their fundraising journey. So Melanie, thank you so much for sharing all the things that you did on this podcast. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you. This was great. Thanks so much, Sapna.
And thank you for listening to the Retail X podcast. We'll have another episode out shortly. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to attend a Retail X series event in person,
Check out www.retailxseries.com for upcoming events in New York. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at RetailXSeries. You can also learn more about me, find fundraising resources, or submit a pitch deck at www.redgiraffeadvisors.com. Thanks, and catch you next time.